Oh, won't you take me down to Memphis on a midnight ride? I wanna move, playing in a traveling band. Yeah, well, I'm flying across the land, trying to get a hand, playing in a traveling band. Take me to the hotel, bag is gone, oh well. Come on, won't you get me to my room? I wanna move, playing in a traveling band. Yeah, well, I'm flying across the land, trying to get a hand, playing in a traveling band. Listen to the radio, talking about the last show. Someone got excited, had to call a state militia. Wanna move, playing in a traveling band. Yeah, well, I'm flying across the land, trying to get a hand, playing in a traveling band. Wow! Here we come again on Saturday night. With your fussing and your fighting, won't you get me to the right? I won't move, playing in a traveling band. Yeah, well, I'm flying across the land, trying to get a hand, playing in a traveling band. Wow! Playing in a traveling band, playing in a traveling band. Why'd you give me till my hand? But I'm playing in a traveling band. I'm flying across the land, trying to get a hand, playing in a traveling band. Wow!
Well, it's nice to meet you. Thank you for coming.
Oh,
You
my
can have a
pleasure.
seat right here.
My pleasure.
So, good afternoon. I'm Joe Casenza,
Hi,
and
Joe.
you're Pete Treves.
That's correct.
And you were in Vietnam?
Yes,
Yes, you're a veteran, correct?
yes.
Now, what was life like before you went to Vietnam?
It was good. I grew up in South Florida in Miami. Went to high school there, and basically was into fast cars and surfing, and that's what it was in the '60s. Always did okay in high school. I did okay enough to, get into college. Basically in '64, '65, I headed up to the University of South Florida on the west coast of Florida.
What made you go to Vietnam? Were you drafted?
Yes, I was
were?
drafted. While I was at the University of South Florida, I had a 2S deferment in those days. Anyone taking, I believe, up to 12 hours or more per quarter or semester or whatever, you were given a 2S deferment. In other words, you weren't called up by the draft. During my second year, I partied a lot the first 2 years, and just barely maintained a 2 point something.
He likes bread and butter. He likes toast in town. That's what baby feeds him. He's a loving man.
Well, I like bread and butter. I like toast and jam. That's what baby feeds me. I'm her loving man.
And was always on academic warning. But during the last semester of my second year, I had taken a political science course that it was awful. It was so boring, I hated going to it. I knew I wasn't going to pass it, so I dropped it. I lost 3 credit hours, and I lost my 2S deferment, and shortly after that I was drafted.
What year were you drafted?
That would have to be 1966.
1966?
Yeah.
All the leaves are brown, and the sky is gray, and the sky is gray. I've been for a while on a winter's day. I'd be safe and warm if I was in LA. If I was in LA, California dreaming on such a winter's day. Stopped into a church, I passed along the way. Well, I got down on my knees, and I pretend to pray. You know the preacher like the cold. He knows I'm gonna stay. California dreaming on such a winter's day.
What was it like to say goodbye to your family?
It was rough because everybody kept saying, why did you drop that course, and what was your thought process there? And I wasn't getting what I thought I should get out of college. I was just there partying, having a good time. I still kept up my surfing. And my family was, I'd have to say, pretty disappointed with my decision.
What did you know about the Vietnam War before you went?
In high school, actually, I had never even heard of Vietnam before I was maybe in 11th or 12th grade in some kind of history course. And then more and more, that was in the early 60s. I don't think we had a big presence in Vietnam at that time, maybe some advisors. I knew very little about the war in Vietnam. I just knew at that time I didn't want to go, which of course was a decision I had made when I went to college. And of course the other decision was when I dropped that course, I lost my deferment.
Did you bring any belongings of yours to Vietnam, like any special, like a ring, your high school ring or something?
No, not really. No, I think I bought a camera to take with me, and I took that over. And it was one of those cheesy little Instamatic cameras.
It's new. It's now. It's Flash Cube. Flash Cube? Flash Cube. Only with the newest Kodak Instamatic cameras. 4 full-power flashes in one tiny cube. Flash Cube. Take 1. Take 2. Take 3. Take 4 flash pictures without changing bulbs. In color, of course. Newest Instamatic camera outfits from less than $18, only from Kodak.
Of course, when I got to Vietnam, we had access to some really nice 35 millimeter stuff through the PACEX catalog, and you could buy some really nice equipment, which I did when I was over there. But when you're in the field, I didn't want to carry, you know, a big bulky camera around, so that any pictures you have for me were taken with that Instamatic.
Did you consider avoiding the draft?
I think I talked about that with several friends of mine that were possibly going to consider heading up to Canada, but I never really gave it any serious thought, no.
Did you form any close bonds with your comrades?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Who were they?
People, you know, when you get in the Army, you know, the first thing you're going to do is go through basic training.
Okay, move out.
Which is just 8 weeks of indoctrination and some, you know, basically understanding commands. And we did go through the first, I think the first tough couple of days in the Army, we were given a like a whole day of tests. I guess it was the Army's way of trying to figure out, you know, where to best fit you. I did qualify for Warrant Officer Training School, which was learning to fly helicopters.
Let's go! Move it! Move it! Okay, let's go!
Problem with that was after you finished all your training, you had a 3-year commitment, which would have meant 2 tours in Vietnam. 1 tour, then come home, train, and then back for a second tour. And at that time, the war was really heating up, and I decided, oh, that's not something. Although I would have loved to learn how to fly. The second thing I qualified for was regular officer candidate school, where you go 6 months to school after your preliminary training, and you would be commissioned as second lieutenant. The problem with that was the only 3 schools available were in the combat arms. It was either infantry, artillery, or combat engineers. I did settle for the combat engineers, so I'll go through my training with you. After basic training, because I decided to go to OCS and go to the engineer school, I was given 8 weeks of advanced infantry training. That was at Fort Jackson in South Carolina. The training was good, and it was all geared towards Vietnam. We had fake villages set up. It was, sometimes you would go into these training exercises, and it was almost like you were in Vietnam. It was very realistic. After that, I went to Fort Belvoir in Alexandria, Virginia, to the Officer Candidate School there in engineering. That was a 6-month school. Basically, first 2 months, it's run very much like the military academies they are. The first 2 months, you're an undergrad, or the lowest form of life you can imagine.
You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you. Now get up. Get on your feet.
Basically, they're trying to weed you out, find out your strengths, your weaknesses, and things like that.
Sir, yes, sir. Private Joker, why did you join my beloved corps? Sir, to kill, sir. So you're a killer? Sir, yes, sir. Let me see your war face. Sir. You got a war face? Ah! That's a war face. Now let me see your war face. Ah! Bullshit. You didn't convince me. Let me see your real war face. Ah! You don't scare me. Work on it. Sir, yes, sir.
In fact, we only graduated about 30% of our original class.
Wow.
Because a lot of guys got they've been through the training that I had gone through so far. They were tired of the harassment and the rigorous training that we took. And a lot of them committed honor code violations to get out, and they were immediately sent to Vietnam. The honor code violation is very simple. An officer candidate does not lie, steal, or cheat, nor does he tolerate any of those who do. So even if you don't commit one of those sins, if you know of somebody that did and you don't report them, you're just as guilty. So it's a tough code to live by.
So like you have to, this.
Yeah. And a lot of these guys committed these intentional honor code violations. They would cheat on a test or something like that, just so they could get out.
Wow.
The second 2 months at OCS, you become a junior candidate. You're given a little bit more responsibility. They're really testing you in 3 areas: leadership skills, academic skills, and basically physical skills. And finally, in the third and final phase of OCS, you're basically a junior officer, and you have now incoming candidates that are under you, and you're basically harassing them and getting them to survive or not. It's a tough program, very tough program.
Mama told me not to come. Mama told me not to come. She said that ain't the way to have fun. Son, that ain't the way to have fun. She said, oh, yeah. Mama told me, mama told me, mama told me, mama told me, oh, yeah. Mama told me not to come. Mama told me, mama told me.
Would you say that it's related to Full Metal Jacket in the beginning sequence, if you ever saw that movie?
That was basic training.
That was basic training.
Right, and that's basically what basic training is like. It's like harassment and stress, a lot of stress.
One for the Commandant. One for the Corps. Get up there. Pull. I guess the Corps don't get theirs. Get up there, pile.
They're teaching basic, military courtesy, simple things like marching and when to salute, when not to salute, things like that.
Respect.
Absolutely. And in basic training, maybe they call it basic training because basically they're breaking you down until you're like nothing. And then they build you back up and you become a soldier.
Quickly, ladies, add holes and elbows. Move it out. Get up here. Move it. Move it. Move it. Move it.
How do they build you back up?
Encouragement, a lot of the training that you have learned, you're tested on constantly. And how you do in that training is whether you don't get recycled. I mean, They could keep doing basic training forever if you didn't meet the standards.
And when you finally arrived at Vietnam after all this horrific training,
Yeah.
what did you first do when you got there? Did you party at the beach and
No.
no?
Well, let me continue with the training. At the end of I expected to be commissioned a second lieutenant in the Corps of Engineers. Well, just at that time, and I'm guessing this is probably around '68, we had an officer come speak to us from military intelligence. And he was saying that they were recruiting graduates from OCS to take part in this new program called the Phoenix program.
He's out there operating without any decent restraint, totally beyond the pale of any acceptable human conduct. And he is still in the field commanding troops.
Terminate with extreme prejudice.
Are you familiar with that at all?
Not much.
Okay. The Phoenix program, it was very controversial at the time. It was a joint military operation between the United States military and the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. Just those implications alone made it controversial. And the goal of the program was to basically eradicate the Viet Cong infrastructure. And these were the people that were political cadre. They were people that were recruiters, recruiting for the Viet Cong. These were people that were tax collectors. These were people that they were thinking, if you cut off the head of the snake dies. And these are the people we were going after.
What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and a carrying signs. Mostly say hooray for our side. It's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
So after OCS, I accepted that, and I was sent to 48 months of language training at the Presidio in Monterey, California. And the language I had to learn was Vietnamese. And that was 48 weeks. It was wonderful duty. My only duty was 5 days a week to attend classes and learn to speak Vietnamese. I don't know if you're familiar with the Monterey Peninsula in California, but it's probably one of the most beautiful places where earth and water meet.
Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going now to stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going. We better stop now. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going. We better stop. Children, what's that sound?
It was a surfing dream for me because I'd never seen waves that big. Had a beautiful house right on the ocean with 2 other lieutenants. It was a lot of partying, a lot of good times, and I enjoyed that year of service a lot. And then after that, I was sent back across the United States to Fort Holabird in Maryland, where I took the 8-week basic intelligence course, military intelligence course. And then I was given leave and back across the country and then sent to Vietnam from there. So now I'm in country. And first thing in country, you're just basically hanging around. Go through training, you get to zero in your weapons, you're waiting for an assignment of where to go. And during that time, I was assigned to MACV, which was the Military Advisory Command in Vietnam. I was going to be the Phoenix advisor for Tay Ninh Province, Phuc Ninh District. I would start out at the province level, which you would say a province is if I could equate it to here, province level would be a state. And then the district level would be very small hamlets and villages. The entire Corps was heavily defoliated with Agent Orange, and probably more than any other of the corps in Vietnam.
One of the most controversial American operations in Vietnam.
Just the name of it evokes all sorts of horrible images. Agent Orange.
It was one way we were going to win the Vietnam War. Dump herbicides all over the jungle so the Viet Cong would come out and fight.
Just hours before, thousands of Vietnam veterans were supposed to be represented in court. Against 7 chemical companies, there was an out-of-court settlement.
Over the next 6 years, the fund will pay out at least $250 million to veterans and their families, including children not yet born. None of this, say the defendants, means an admission of their liability for their veterans' injuries.
Agent Orange was a safe product when it was used in the Vietnam War, and it's a safe product today.
I don't think people appreciate how negative Vietnam was an experience and how nobody wanted to deal with it.
What they're doing amounts to a pretty important form of conservation in itself, the saving of American lives.
The government has now agreed to pay $8 million a year to veterans.
With today's decision, the government admits for the first time Agent Orange may well have caused cancer. In this case, a rare form called soft tissue sarcoma.
Today, I am announcing the normalization of diplomatic relationships with Vietnam.
This past week, 4 American combat veterans of Vietnam returned there.
As we anticipated, the Vietnamese doctors who met with us very much share our concern about the effects of Agent Orange. Although that war was long ago, there is lingering anger about the United States' use of a controversial defoliant spread by American aircraft on the jungles there. An epidemic of birth defects, brain damage, and rare cancers still affecting hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese today.
There was always an issue that would come up in our discussions with the Vietnamese that was clearly a source of continuing resentment and anger, and that was Agent Orange.
To a very small compound out in the middle of nowhere, and in that compound I had with me a sergeant that was a small arms expert. I had a sergeant that was a large arm expert, mostly mortars. I had a medic, and I had an RTO and a radio telegraph operator. Basically, we were advisors to what they called a regional force company. Vietnamese. These were Vietnamese soldiers that were stationed at this outpost, I'll call it. And our mission was now to go and, through intelligence gathering, find out. We would conduct what you would think are cordon and search operations. These were operations where we would go into a particular, based on intelligence, go into a particular hamlet or village, completely surround the hamlet with the RF company, the Vietnamese soldiers, and then we would go in, search basically for weapons, documents, food, medical supplies, anything that would support the Viet Cong in their efforts.
Make them weak.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of times we would gain intelligence and we would say, well, we hear that this particular village or hamlet was going to have a BC tax collector come in and you know. Get from the people wherever we could, whether it was food, medical supplies, or whatever. We would do this at night. We would basically set up an ambush and wait for these guys to show up.
So they would use their own citizens as ways to make
Sure.
their army stronger.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's where they were recruiting. You know, any young man, 18 years or older, the recruiters would come in, and you know, these recruiters were good. They paint a real pretty picture. I mean, you got to understand that the people and the young men in these villages were basically rice farmers. They weren't trained. They weren't, you know, Viet Cong sympathizers or supporters. But these recruiters would come in, and they were good. They were very good. They were trained political cadre by the National Liberation Front. And they would recruit these people, train them, and teach them to be, you know, Viet Cong soldiers and fighters. A lot of times when we would come into these villages, we would set up these, if we heard a recruiter was coming in, my goal was to capture the guy and use him, you know, like through interrogation to gain more information. And here comes old Charlie bouncing down the trail, coming in, and he's got his, I'll call them bodyguards with him, other Viet Cong soldiers. And things would get foobar real fast because it would end up in a firefight.
Wow.
They didn't want to, you know, hear about being captured. And a lot of times we took casualties, and they took casualties during those firefights.
Were you told to take cover and...
It's not like you see on the movies and TV. It's not one shot, one kill. I mean, during a firefight, it's just total pandemonium. I mean, you're just trying to stay alive, and you know, you've got your M16 on rock and roll, and it's fully automatic, and everybody with you is just blasting away at each other, and some people get hit and some people don't.
But like, you know, everyone's in grass, you know, you can't see anything. It's like the stress of that.
A lot, and again, it's at night too.
And at night, yeah.
Yeah. So, but bullets.
Bullets are bullets.
Yeah, they go and they hit people. They hit them bad. So.
Were you ever wounded in any of this?
Yeah, I was just small, you know, scratches at that. A piece of shrapnel in my gut that was I could basically pull out. I have a scar there now, but nothing that ever required me to be medevaced. Just, you know, put a Band-Aid on it and good to go.
Were you given any of these search and destroy missions? You know, you come home for a day, gone for like 2 months.
No.
None of that?
I wasn't like that at all. That was our grunts, the American grunts, the 11 Bravos. They absolutely had it the worst in Vietnam. These guys would go out sometimes 2-3 weeks at a time, never get a hot meal, eating sea rations the whole time, setting up a night perimeter every single night. Just, you know, I'm glad I didn't get involved in it. I had too many friends that went that route, and a lot of them didn't come home. So.
Oh man. Did you ever feel that with all of this stress and you don't know where your enemy is at literally every time?
Yeah.
And to the point where now booby traps were all over the ground.
Yeah. Basically, I told you about the five team members I had under me.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, you have to understand, I was still a kid. I was a 22-year-old, you know, first lieutenant in Vietnam. I mean, the year before, the biggest decision I had to make was which wave to catch. And now I'm responsible for the lives of these 5 guys. And I call some were boys. They were 19, 20 years old. And I had, you know, some men that were like, you know, staff sergeants that had families and children. It's a responsibility that you can't believe. I mean, I'm 22 years old. I was no more than a kid myself.
Wow.
And I had to get these people home safe. And then I was responsible for the Vietnamese soldiers, the company that, that was there for our protection, but also to go on these missions with us. And, a lot of them, I spoke Vietnamese, and I made a lot of friends with the Vietnamese soldiers as well. I mean, these were just young guys, just like American soldiers over there. They didn't want to die. They didn't, but it happens,
Do you know what you were even fighting for when you were in the middle of all this?
In the beginning, I did. I was really pretty gung-ho in the fact that I thought, the domino theory was, going to happen, and all these countries are going to fall and become communist. In 1970, though, when Nixon sent us into Cambodia to pretty much interdict the Ho Chi Minh Trail, I did a pretty much of a 180 turnaround.
Wow.
I knew two things after Cambodia. One, we had a red line as far as we could go into Cambodia. We really had the NVA and the Viet Cong on the run. We captured tons of medical supplies, weapons, and even large artillery pieces, all kinds of stuff. I mean, tons of this stuff. Medical supplies, ammunition, food. I mean, literally mountains of bagged rice and stuff. And we chased these guys right up to the red line, and we had to stop.
So it was just like you were just stealing their stuff, but you couldn't stop the army. They could just regather everything.
They just kept going west until they got to our red line that we couldn't cross. That's what I knew. That I knew two things after Cambodia. One, the American army or the American military was never going to prevail in Vietnam because the war was being run by basically politicians and bureaucrats, and not letting the military generals and the officers decide what needed to be done.
Ladies and gentlemen of the press, questions. From towns and villages, cities, campuses, and farms, we have come in tens of thousands to march and rally at the United Nations in New York and at the birthplace of the World Organization in San Francisco on this, the 15th day of April, 1967. We, the participants in today's unprecedented national peace demonstration, although of many national origins, faiths, and shades of political opinion, are united in our conviction of the imperative need for an immediate, peaceful solution to an illegal and unjustifiable war. We are determined that the killing be stopped and that a nuclear holocaust be avoided. We rally at the United Nations in order to reaffirm our support of the principles of peace, universality, equal rights, and self-determination of peoples embodied in the Charter and acclaimed by mankind, but violated by the United States.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Tonight I want to talk to you on a subject of deep concern to all Americans and to many people in all parts of the world, the war in Vietnam. I believe that one of the reasons for the deep division about Vietnam is that many Americans have lost confidence in what their government has told them about our policy.
Man made the cars to take us over the road.
The American people cannot and should not be asked to support a policy which involves the overriding issues of war and peace unless they know the truth about that policy. Tonight, therefore, I would like to answer some of the questions that I know are on the minds of many of you listening to me. How and why did America get involved in Vietnam in the first place? How has this administration changed the policy of the previous administration? What has really happened in the negotiations in Paris and on the battlefront in Vietnam? What choices do we have if we are to end the war? What are the prospects for peace? Now let me begin by describing the situation I found when I was inaugurated on January 20.
Man thinks about a little bit of baby girls and a baby boys. Man make them happy, 'cause man make them toys. And after man make everything he can, you know that man makes money to buy from other men. This is a man's world, but it would be nothing, not one little thing without a woman or a girl.
The war had been going on for 4 years. 31,000 Americans had been killed in action. The training program for the South Vietnamese was beyond schedule.
And bitterness.
540,000 Americans were in Vietnam with no plans to reduce the number. No progress had been made at the negotiations in Paris, and the United States had not put forth a comprehensive peace proposal. The war was causing deep division at home and criticism from many of our friends as well as our enemies abroad. In view of these circumstances, there were some who urged that I end the war at once by ordering the immediate withdrawal of all American forces. From a political standpoint, this would have been a popular and easy course to follow. After all, we became involved in the war while my predecessor was in office. I could blame the defeat, which would be the result of my action, on him and come out as the peacemaker. Some put it to me quite bluntly. This was the only way to avoid allowing Johnson's war to become Nixon's war. But I had a greater obligation than to think only of the years of my administration and of the next election. I had to think of the effect of my decision on the next generation and on the future of peace and freedom in America and in the world. Let us all understand that the question before us is not whether some Americans are for peace and some Americans are against peace. The question at issue is not whether Johnson's war becomes Nixon's war. The great question is, how can we win America's peace? Well, let us turn now to the fundamental issue. Why and how did the United States become involved in Vietnam in the first place? 15 years ago, North Vietnam, with the logistical support of Communist China and the Soviet Union, launched a campaign to impose a communist government on South Vietnam by instigating and supporting a revolution. In response to the request of the government of South Vietnam, President Eisenhower sent economic aid and military equipment to assist the people of South Vietnam in their efforts to prevent a communist takeover. 7 years ago, President Kennedy sent 16,000 military personnel to Vietnam as combat advisors. 4 years ago, President Johnson sent American combat forces to South Vietnam. Now, many believe that President Johnson's decision to send American combat forces to South Vietnam was wrong. And many others, I among them, have been strongly critical of the way the war has been conducted. But the question facing us today is, now that we are in the war, what is the best way to end it?